Subcommittee on Oversight will come to order. Good afternoon. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, the biographies and truth in testimony, and the disclosures for today's witness panels. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Let me begin first by thanking our witnesses for y'all's patience and flexibility, and y'all have been very patient and very flexible, and I greatly appreciate that. We've had several exchanges over the last couple of weeks as we've had to change the hearing start time not once but twice. I appreciate y'all's willingness to work with us on this. The title of today's hearing is Top Challenges for Science Agencies, Reports from the Inspectors General, Part 2. Part 1 was a couple of weeks ago. This is the second of two hearings we scheduled to hear from the offices of Inspectors General representing the agencies within this committee's jurisdiction. The object of these hearings is to learn about the major performance and management challenges facing each agency from the perspective of each Inspector General. The DOEIG's office is a regular guest at the hearings before this committee. We follow your work very closely and pay attention to your thorough analysis. For example, during testimony provided at the subcommittee hearing last year, your colleague explained that the department, quote, awarded grants of nearly $300 million for clean cities projects and about $400 million for transportation electrification efforts, unquote. And while both programs required fund recipients to comply with federal regulations governing financial assistance awards, as noted in testimony provided by your office back then, you identified, quote, needed improvements in financial management for both programs, unquote. Since then, the department does not seem to have improved its management abilities, as further highlighted in a report by your office issued last month about LG Chem. This Michigan company received nearly $150 million in Recovery Act funds. Yet, not only did the company fail to meet basic project goals, its employees actually got paid for watching movies and playing board games. These are serious concerns about serious amounts of taxpayer money that require this committee's attention. As for the EPA, we always have questions about their actions and decisions. The Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS, is a perennial topic of discussion, even when we were in the minority. IRIS is on the GOA's high-risk series and continues to be on the IG's management challenges list for the agency. Another issue that this committee has been involved with for several months is EPA's draft Bristol Bay Watershed Assessment. EPA has not provided clear answers about the purpose, cost, or relevance of an assessment that is based on a hypothetical mining plan. Hypothetical mining plan, mind you. Concerns have been raised about this assessment, prompting one peer reviewer to describe it as, quote, hogwash, unquote. We've also heard concerns about the integrity and usefulness of EPA's second peer review of this assessment. These concerns, along with other potential problems regarding conflict of interest and proper process at other advisory and peer review bodies at the agency, will require the IG's diligent attention as they ultimately impact important regulatory decisions at EPA. The Department of Interior also faces many challenges in the future, not the least of which is how it conducts science and incorporates that science into department decisions. The department is embroiled in scientific integrity cases involving polar bear research, the Klamath River Dam removal decision, the Delta smelt issue regarding California's Central Valley water, the manipulation of peer reviewers' comments to justify an offshore drilling moratorium, and the treatment of science in deciding to extend the operating agreement for an oyster company on a national seashore, just to name a few. Because of the department's track record, an uncertain process for handling allegations between the IG and the agency, and questions about the IG's independence, I see scientific integrity as a fundamental challenge facing the agency moving forward. This challenge affects the use of federal lands, Endangered Species Act listings that influence property owners, and countless other important national interests tied to resources and wildlife. As Inspectors General, you all have the important responsibility of conducting and supervising audits and investigations, providing leadership, recommending policies, and preventing and detecting waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement at the agencies. We rely on your diligence and independence to assist in our oversight responsibilities. That's why I look forward to receiving your testimonies and hearing your answers to my questions later this hour. I thank you. Now I recognize the ranking member, my friend from New York, the gentleman, Mr. Maffey, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, my friend from Georgia. And I want to join you in welcoming our witnesses today. We have a tight schedule this afternoon, and I promise that I won't take too much time, but I really do want to hear from these witnesses. As was said by the former chairman of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, Earl Devaney, who pointed out that history shows approximately 7% of any large expenditure is likely to be subject to fraud. Now, while I'm sure there's a lot of people who believe that it's far, far more than that in today's federal government, even 7% is too much, and I think we can do better. And that's precisely why we have Inspectors General, to help us locate waste, fraud, and abuse, and provide accountability to the American people that we are good stewards of their tax dollars. They are expected to be the watchdogs first and foremost. And in that, Inspectors General have a tough job. They have to watch what the agency does in terms of making sure they follow the law. They have to guard the taxpayers' precious dollars. They have to offer advice and direction to management without getting so close to their agency heads that they lose their independence. On the one hand, they answer to the president, and on the other hand, they have to answer to Congress. I think in both cases, you always answer to the American people. All three of our witnesses have had experience standing up to those pressures, and all demonstrate somewhat different choices in how to navigate through them. But even if we do not always agree with their conclusions or like the implementation of what they find, I want to recognize that all three of the offices work hard to produce meaningful audits, carry forward criminal investigations when necessary, and produce thoughtful reports that provide perspective on management challenges. I particularly want to point out that the Department of Energy's IG is an office that provides a good model for others on how to balance the work. Mr. Chairman, I am particularly looking to these witnesses to tell us about the impact of the current sequestration on the work of their offices, and to offer insights into how their agencies might adapt to sequestration in the most cost-effective fashion. And in view of the conversation in the full committee earlier, I just want to make it clear, Mr. Chairman, that I do not solely hold the congressional leadership or the president responsible for this. I certainly don't hold the chairman responsible, who, as noted, had voted against it. I was not in Congress then, but I do think that whoever is to blame, and there are many, we need to look at how to move forward. And so these across-the-board cuts done mid-year, they may be producing potential waste and unanticipated costs. And at the very least, I think it would be useful for this committee to gather whatever information we can on this matter to inform our actions and that of the full committee and the Congress moving forward. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Maffei. I know you weren't here when we had that bill before us. It was proposed by the president, and members of Congress voted on both sides, so it was something that I thought was terrible policy, and that's the reason I voted against it. I don't believe generally in across the board cuts. I think we need to make some targeted cuts, and I appreciate the cooperation that I have from you, and love working with you. And if got a good partnership in this committee, and so we'll go forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If there are members that wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be made at this point in the record. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Gregory FRIEDMAN, Inspector General, U.S. Department of Energy, a position he has held since 1998. And he's been before this committee and the full committee before, so we appreciate your being here, Mr. FRIEDMAN. He's many times a participant in these hearings. Our second witness is Mr. Arthur ELKINS, Jr., Inspector General, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, a position he has held since 2010. And our third witness is Ms. Mary KENDALL, Deputy Inspector General, U.S. Department of Interior, a position she has held since 1999 and includes a brief stint as Acting Inspector General when the former IG left. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, and we are kind of pressed for time today. So if you would try to keep your spoken testimony within that 5-minute window, after which the committee members will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. Your written testimony will be included in the record of the hearing. Now, it is the practice of this subcommittee on oversight to receive testimony under oath. If you would please rise and raise your right hand, unless you have an objection to taking an oath. Do either of you have an objection? Any of you have an objection to taking an oath? Okay. Let the record reflect all indicated they have no objection doing so. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses participating have taken the oath and said that they did swear to that oath. I now recognize our first witness, Mr. Friedman, to present your testimony. Sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Maffei, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the major challenges facing the Department of Energy and the associated work of the Office of Inspector General. The Department of Energy is a multifaceted agency responsible for some of the nation's most complex and technologically advanced missions. These include vital work in basic and applied research, clean energy innovation, environmental cleanup, medical applications, nuclear weapons, stewardship, and efforts to enhance national security. To advance these efforts, the Department receives an annual appropriation of nearly $30 billion, employs 115,000 or so federal and contractor personnel, and manages assets valued in excess of $180 billion. We provide, in the Office of Inspector General, independent oversight of the Department's programs, and of course, our objective is to promote economy and efficiency and to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse. Based on this body of work on an annual basis, my office identifies what we consider to be the most significant management challenges facing the Department. For fiscal year 2013, our list of challenges includes the following: operational efficiency and cost savings, which I'll discuss a little bit in more depth later on, contract and financial assistance award management, cybersecurity, energy supply, environmental cleanup, human capital management, nuclear waste disposal, safeguards and security, and stockpile stewardship. We also develop a watch list of emerging issues and other items that warrant special attention by Department officials. These include infrastructure modernization, the Department's loan guarantee program, and worker and community safety. These challenges are integral to the Department's mission. They are not amenable to immediate resolution, and they can only be addressed through a concerted effort over time. I'd like to focus, as I indicated earlier, on what may be the most pressing current challenge, that is sustaining departmental operations in a period of constrained resources. In our fiscal year 2012 and 2013 management challenge reports, we provided the Department with a series of suggested actions for major operational improvements and cost reduction initiatives. They include the following. First, applying the quadrennial technology review strategic planning concept to the Department's entire multi-billion-dollar science portfolio. This would put the Department in a better position from our perspective to develop metrics to evaluate its science efforts and to determine whether the science initiatives are aligned with current national priorities. Second, we proposed eliminating costly duplicate functions associated with the National Nuclear Security Administration. NNSA maintains a set of distinctly separate overhead operations that are often redundant to existing departmental functions. Third, we suggested the Department use a BRAC-style commission, Department of Defense BRAC-style commission, to evaluate the current alignment of its laboratory and technology complex and to propose revisions, including laboratory right-sizing and laboratory consolidation wherever possible. We noted that of the $10 billion spent annually on operating the Department's 16 federally funded research and development centers, administrative, overhead, and indirect costs account for about $3.5 billion of this amount. This burden may not be sustainable in the current budget environment. Fourth, reprioritizing the Department's $268 billion environmental remediation liability. with the objective of ensuring that high-risk initiatives and activities are funded first. This would require an analytically based remediation strategy which addresses environmental concerns on a national, complex-wide basis, essentially a form of remediation triage. Lastly, we proposed evaluating the current structure of the Department's $1 billion per year physical security apparatus, nearly $700 million of which is spent on acquiring nearly 4,000 protective force guards from contractors around the country. We think other options need to be examined, including the possibility of federalizing those individuals. The Department of Energy has an extraordinary mission, and it truly is extraordinary. Yet, like most federal agencies, it faces significant management challenges. Current budget trends and realities complicate the job of resolving the challenges that we have identified and the other issues facing the Department. The operative question going forward from our perspective may well be, what can the Department afford in this environment? We look forward to working with program officials, agency management, and the Congress in our common effort to advance the interests of U.S. taxpayers. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'm pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Thank you for staying within the 5 minutes. Now, Mr. Elkins, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Braun, Ranking Member Maffei, and members of the subcommittee. I am Arthur Elkins, Inspector General of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss the significant management challenges facing the EPA that the OIG has identified in fiscal year 2012. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share with you our work and recommendations on how to improve EPA's programs and operations. Before I begin, I would like to commend the expertise, dedication, and professionalism of the OIG staff, whose exceptional work serves as the foundation of my testimony this afternoon. I also would like to mention that last year, the OIG was a recipient of the Alexander Hamilton Award for its work related to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. This is the highest award bestowed by the IG community. Although we are a part of the EPA, senior EPA leaders can neither prevent nor prohibit us from conducting our work. In accordance with the IG Act of 1978 as amended, the OIG's mission is to conduct independent and objective audits, investigations, and inspections, prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse, promote economy, effectiveness, and efficiency, review pending legislation and regulation, and keep the agency head and Congress fully and currently informed. We identified 5 challenges which are detailed in my statement for the record. I will focus on 2 of these challenges: oversight of delegations to state and limited capability to respond to cyber security attacks. To accomplish its mission to protect human health and the environment, EPA develops regulations and establishes programs to implement environmental laws. The agency relies heavily on authorized state and tribal agencies to implement environmental programs, and the performance of state and tribal governments is critical to assuring protection of human health and the environment. Since 2008, we have designated oversight of delegations to state as a management challenge. For example, we reported that despite EPA efforts to improve state enforcement performance, state enforcement programs frequently do not meet national goals, and states do not always take necessary enforcement actions. If these issues are not addressed, state performance will remain inconsistent across the country, providing unequal environmental benefits to the public and an unlevel playing field for regulated industries. We reported that Georgia's concentrated animal feeding operations program was operating without proper permits. Inspection reports were missing required components, and the state was not assessing compliance with permits. As a result of inadequate oversight and reporting, Georgia's waters were vulnerable to discharges of animal waste from these facilities, which are associated with a range of human health and ecological impacts and contribute to the degradation of the nation's surface waters. As technology continues to advance and the agency increases its use of automated systems, having a strong IT infrastructure that addresses security at the enterprise architectural level is critical to protecting the agency against cyber attacks. It is imperative that EPA continues efforts to strengthen practices to guard against advanced persistent threats. While EPA has committed to making significant progress, this challenge persists. For example, we found limited assurance that data in the Automated System Security Evaluation and Remediation Tracking Tool are reliable for decision-making. This tool is used to track the remediation of weaknesses in EPA's Information Security Program. as well as inform management about the adequacy of controls implemented to protect agency systems. We reported that EPA neither developed a comprehensive deployment strategy for its security information and event management tool to incorporate all of the agency's offices, nor developed a formal training program to train employees on how to use the tool. This computerized tool is used to centralize the storage and review of computer logs or events to monitor or investigate unusual network activity. While the EPA's senior leadership is taking the management challenges seriously and is making progress in resolving them, the agency must remain focused on these challenges, especially in light of the difficult budgetary climate facing all federal agencies today. The OIG will continue to provide oversight and track the EPA's actions on these challenges while looking to identify any emerging issues warranting attention. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm the OIG's commitment to vigorously work with the Administrator and Congress to ensure that the agency's programs and operations work efficiently and effectively for the benefit of the American taxpayer. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement, and I will be pleased to answer any questions you or the members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elkins. Now I recognize Ms. Kendall for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Maffei, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the major management and performance challenges facing the Department of the Interior and the approach the Office of Inspector General takes for providing oversight in these program areas. As you know, the OIG makes an annual determination as to what the most significant management and performance challenges are facing Interior. Historically, the OIG made this determination by looking at our recent past audit and investigative work to identify the major challenges. In the past 2 years, however, we chose to take a more prospective outlook. Utilizing a number of resources, the OIG identified the top challenges we see facing the department. We then met with the department officials to gain their perspective on the challenges we identified and the areas we would report upon. In those areas that the OIG had not done significant, or in some cases any, audit or investigative work, we asked the department to help us identify 1 or 2 program areas that present the most challenge or concern. Prior to issuing our report, we have done some limited analysis to better identify the scope of these issues involved in the greater challenges. We then use the major management and performance challenges to inform and guide our audit and, to the extent possible, investigative work in the coming year. Last year, the OIG identified the top management performance challenges as energy management, climate change, water programs, responsibility to Indians in insular areas, COBEL and Indian land consolidation, and operation efficiencies. Therefore, in planning our audit and evaluation work for fiscal year 2013 and determining the scope for this work, we were guided by these top challenge categories in developing our targeted categories. In energy, some of the program areas subject to review are mineral materials sales, underground injection controls, offshore renewable energy, onshore oil and gas permitting, and pipeline management. In climate change, we are reviewing the various climate change requirements placed on the department. In water, we are conducting a series of evaluations of the Coastal Impact Assistance Program and will be looking at the Bureau of Reclamation wastewater and groundwater programs. In Indians and insular areas, we have looked at the election system and public finance authority of the Virgin Islands and are reviewing the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. In addition to these top challenge categories, we have maintained 2 additional targeted categories for audits and evaluations, as they are so integral to the mission of DOI and have been areas of concern historically. They are asset protection and preservation and health, safety, security, and maintenance. For investigations, we are necessarily more reactive. We cannot plan our investigative activities like we do our audits and evaluations. We are, however, guided by 5 investigative priorities: contract and grant fraud, energy, scientific misconduct, ethical violations, and public safety and security. Clearly, our investigative priorities overlap to a certain degree with our audit and evaluation priorities. This is a natural overlap, not necessarily intentional. But as an OIG of less than 300 employees that oversees a department with over 75,000 employees, we must focus our oversight activities on those areas of greatest concern and challenge. Although there may be many other ways in which to fine-tune this focus, using targeted categories and investigative priorities help us deploy our resources to the areas in greatest need of oversight in the Department of the Interior. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my formal testimony. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kendall. I congratulate all three witnesses for staying within that 5 minutes. I greatly appreciate it. And I thank you all for being available for questioning today. Reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair at this point will open the first round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Ms. Kendall, you've refused to comply with congressional subpoena and obstructed at least 2 congressional committees' inquiries into the Deepwater Horizon offshore drilling moratorium report. You've also adopted a policy to work more collaboratively with the department. One of the most important qualities of an IG is their independence. How can this committee trust your work, particularly when even your testimony today states that you collaborated with the department and, quote, to quote you, together agreed upon the challenge areas we would report on? Ms. Kendall?
Excuse me, yes, sir. We did take a collaborative approach with the department, primarily because I'm going to say the Association of Government Auditors made a recommendation to the Department of the Interior that the way that the top management challenges had been reported in the past did not give a good sense of sort of where the department was and what the IG, the position the IG took. It was more a sort of debate between the
Ms. Kendall, I'm sorry to interrupt you because my time's very limited. The point is, when you collaborate with the department, that's not your job. Your job is to be a watchdog, to oversee them, to report things that they're doing that are wasteful, abuse, fraud, other types of oversight that you're supposed to be doing. That's what we have in this committee's responsibility, as being an oversight committee. And if you're working in collaboration with the agency, I don't know that we can trust your independence. I don't know that we can trust what you tell us. The IGs have to be independent. It's absolutely a critical part of what you guys do. Mr. Friedman, the administration's attempt, which I think was very misdirected, the attempt to permanently shutter the Yucca Mountain project is still in the process of being litigated. In spite of the possibility the courts might require DOE to continue pursuing the license, which hopefully that will happen, DOE has eliminated all semblance of a nuclear waste management program, and that affects every single nuclear facility in this country, including the Georgia Power Company in my own state, including the legislatively created Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. Has DOE IG examined DOE's ability to reconstitute the Yucca Mountain project? Should the court, well, let me ask that question. Have you all looked at reinstituting the Yucca Mountain project?
We have not. First of all, Mr. Chairman, nuclear waste disposal and the termination of the Yucca Mountain project is one of our management challenges, which I referred to earlier.
Yes.
This is a $15 billion tunnel to nowhere in the middle of Nevada. So it's one of the worst cases of how not, or the best cases actually, of how not to make public policy from my perspective, and we have been outspoken on that. In terms of reconstituting the office, the expertise this is by observation. We have not done a report. By observation, the expertise, large parts of the expertise, have left the office, and I'm not sure. Could it be reconstituted? I'm sure it could. Would it be extremely difficult? The answer is yes.
Well, obviously, you think the court should not require them to reconstitute that. Is that correct?
No, I have no position on the court's position with regard to reconstitution at all.
Okay, has the DOE-EIG examined OCR-WM's data retention plans to preserve the relevant records and documentation?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because when the administration made the decision that it made not to fund the Yucca Mountain project and the office, we did do a review, and we indicated that we were concerned that after expenditures of nearly $15 billion, that there would be no appropriate means to maintain that information so that it could be used as a planning tool, if nothing else, for nuclear waste disposal decisions in the future. So
were you maintaining those records?
There is a system. We determined that there was a system to maintain those records. We have not looked at it in the last two and a half years.
Well, my time's just about up, but this is a huge issue for us in Georgia and South Carolina and the Southeast and all over the country, and it's something I've been very interested in. This Yucca Mountain project has been studied at great length. We had hearings here in the full committee about the safety of it, and it's been shown that this is the best repository. It's not disposal, it's a repository, in my opinion, of this nuclear waste. My time's expired. Now I recognize Mr. Maffei for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if each of the inspectors general could very briefly tell us how the sequester is affecting their own offices. So not the department, but your own office. We'll start with Mr. Friedman.
Well, Mr. Maffei, we have canceled a very important training meeting that we had. It's not really a conference. It is a meeting. We were required to meet certain professional standards and train our auditors specifically. We had to cancel that, and we're looking at alternatives. We're limiting travel. We are limiting training, and we are going to institute a hiring freeze in the not-too-distant future. So at this point, we have the resources to continue. We are anticipating a reduction, but we've planned carefully, and we think we'll be okay in terms of furloughs and other job actions.
Mr. Elkins, thank you. Mr. Friedman. Mr. Elkins.
Yeah, thank you. I'll echo Mr. Friedman's comments. Generally speaking, we're pretty much in the same boat. We have to take a look at training, travel. Over 80% of our appropriations are in FTEs. In order to do the IG's work, you have to have people, and the people need to get out into travel to do their investigations and do the audits. I would like to say that there's also an opportunity cost that's missing here as well. The IG community is probably one of the few organizations that actually produce a return on investment. We pay for ourselves. And at the end of the day, when we have to cut our resources and do the work that we need to do, that has an impact on the bottom line because we're not out, looking at fraud, waste, and abuse. So yeah, it's going to have a big impact on our ability to do our mission.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying cutting the resources at the oversight level may lead to more waste and therefore overall may end up costing the taxpayer more money than if we had the appropriate resources at the IG.
Absolutely. If we don't do it, who will do it?
I agree. Ms. Kendall.
Yes, sir. I would echo what Mr. Friedman and Mr. Elkins both said. We are also operating right now at about 90% of our full FTE, and we've slashed training, we've slashed travel. We're trying to limit travel to as close to our office locations as possible for the work that we are doing. Like Mr. Elkins said, about 80% is in salaries and benefits, and the rest is really in support of our mission. So it's quite a significant effect.
Thank you. And then very briefly, Mr. Friedman, and the chairman may be surprised that I'm going to ask a question on this, but I am very interested in the LG Chem case in Michigan and what you were able to find there. I do believe that these are important programs, and when they're abused, it's an extremely detrimental effort to our attempts to green the economy and make sure that we can sustain the planet. So I'd like an update on where you are with that, and I would note that these need to be competitive programs. I have a battery company in my district that applied and was not granted these grants, and we're actually making batteries at my plant. So could you just give me an update as to where that investigation is and what you found?
Do you want me to synopsize what our report said, Mr. Maffei?
Sure. Nothing since the report?
I'm sorry. Essentially, it was a grant to build a plant in Holland, Michigan, designed to produce lithium-ion batteries, primarily for the Volt. It went to LG. It went to a predecessor of LG. LG purchased the predecessor. We found that there were allegations that employees, because there was no demand for the product, that employees were in fact playing board games and volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, as important as that may be, certainly on the government payroll. We found that we confirmed that's the case. We identified at least $1.6 million in inappropriate payments, of which the department recovered from LG Chem $840,000. But more importantly, actually, is the fact that this 650,000 square foot plant is idled because there's no demand for the product at this point. One of the conditions precedent to granting the grant was that the LG production of lithium-ion batteries in South Korea would be transferred to this plant.
Yes.
That component was never, although it was conceived, it was part of the conception of the grant, it never made its way into the written product. As a consequence, the department had no leverage, so they told us to force LG to meet that term, which was extremely unfortunate.
Realizing I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. Friedman, is there any update? Have you concluded the investigation? Are you continuing to look at how this so-called competitive decision was made?
We have completed the audit component of the investigation. There are other aspects of it that are currently under review.
Okay, we'll be very interested in those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for going over.
Mr. Maffei, I'll always give you some leeway here on that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Maffei. Let's go to Mr. Schweikert. My friend from Arizona, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is it properly, and forgive me for asking, it is properly pronounced Mr. Maffei?
It rhymes with buffet, so
buffet.
You know, think everything you
now
want.
You just made me hungry.
Everything you want to eat for $12.95, except with an M, of course.
Yeah, and that's in New York.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, but Mr. Friedman, actually, my friend from New York here, who's a brand new friend, obviously, was basically going down a path that I know it's not. You know, your job is ultimately to audit, analyze policies that we make here in Congress. And where we're going to have maybe some differences is, was this actually a place that we should have been putting capital in, or instead of designing, you know, sort of tax and mechanical codes and those things that maybe the benefit should have gone to the battery factory in his district because they were producing and working. But when you're looking at this LG example in Michigan, your department, or the department you oversee, has dozens and dozens of these grants, assistance, loan guarantees. What methodology do you reach out to? How do you grab data sets? How do you stay on top of it to know that you don't have bad actors out there?
Well, understand, Mr. Schweikert, that I'm giving you an answer from the IG prism. The department has a fairly extensive mechanism for managing the grants process and the contract process and other financial awards process, for making priority decisions, for evaluating what proposals make sense and what proposals don't make sense. Our role, as I see it, is to probe those processes to make sure that, in fact, they're using the structure that exists in the federal acquisition regulations and good logic and good common sense.
But my concern is, how do you catch them quickly? I mean, you know, have you embraced enough technology, or the agencies you oversee, so they're getting monthlies? They're getting, you know, you're actually seeing purchase orders that are attached to the grants, you know, that you actually can see production. Is there? I mean, this drives me insane because it's close to planned economy, and that we know doesn't work. But if we're handing out the money, how does it ultimately get overseen, and mechanically, how do you do it quickly?
Okay. Are you asking from an, again,
purely from the guy it's auditing?
From an IG perspective?
In many ways, you're auditing the auditors.
Well, we're auditing those who are responsible for managing these contracts and instruments. And the answer is we try our best, Mr. Schweikert, to be proactive and preventative in nature rather than reactive and come in after the fact. And we've done that in a number of cases where we are getting essentially looking at invoicing on a real-time basis to try to prevent unallowable costs before they occur rather than after the fact. I don't know. I hope I'm answering your question, but I'm more than happy to go beyond that.
It's a classic design controls setup. You know, we all had in our accounting 101 and then 301 classes. Ms. Kendall, in this one may be tainted because of some personal experiences when I was Maricopa County Treasurer. Is there a mechanism? Does it hit your audit standards, your review standards, litigation settlements? You know, where Department of Interior, you know, is being sued because of a certain corridor, certain flood, certain this, certain that, and the mechanics within the decision to either settle. Do those hit your desk?
We have not had any issues really with litigation in the department that I can think of right now. It just hasn't been something that's come to us.
Okay. It's one of our folklores out west is sue the Department of Interior, sue the Forest Service, sue them, because that's how you get what you want. Because you basically, you know, sue them and they'll agree, and that way you actually get a court order that sort of circumvents much of the rule writing mechanics.
Interesting. It's not something that I was familiar with. I'm glad you brought it to my attention. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schweikert. Now, Mr. Peters, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's much easier to pronounce, too, I suppose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elkins, I had some questions for you. Last month, your office released a report calling for EPA to improve its air emissions data for oil and gas production, and it said that the sector had various pollution processes emit large amounts of harmful pollutants that affect air quality in local, regional, and global levels. States and the EPA rely on this air emissions data to guide this decision, and putting aside for the fact how we even know what the amounts are, how could EPA improve its directly measured air emissions data, and is there anything that Congress can do to help that process?
Well, as I recall, the import of that report really addressed the fact that EPA didn't have enough data to be able to make decisions as to whether or not it was problematic or not. I'm not quite sure just exactly what the recommendation in terms of what Congress could do to assist. This is more of a data quality issue that EPA has, an investment that the agency needs to make in order to strengthen and bolster its ability to make decisions with the data that it has. But that was the issue related to that report.
But does EPA have this sufficient authority to be able to get that data if it wanted to get it?
I would have to say that they do. It's a matter of just being, they need to accumulate the data. They clearly, have the expertise to be able to do that. So, yes, the data is available. They just need to collect it.
So there's no need for congressional authorization to EPA to get them to collect the data that we would all need to evaluate whether this is a problem, as far as you know?
As far as I know, I don't see that that would be necessary. But of course, the agency may have some constraints that I'm not aware of.
Do you know whether the drilling companies keep this data themselves, or whether they're required to?
I do not know. I don't recall that was brought out in our report.
So, is it possible that drillers? I have to concede we don't know whether it's worse than we think or better than we think because we don't have the data. But it's possible, I suppose, that a driller at a particular site would be emitting exceptionally high levels of methane but not know it, or would you expect that they would know that?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, so that's kind of hard to say. I really wouldn't have an opinion on that. I mean, if you're not looking for it, and if you don't have any, any mechanisms or tools to identify it, I'm not quite sure you would know it. I would think the science would suggest that, based on the type of production and the type of work that you're doing, that it's going to produce certain byproducts. And if methane is, based on the science, is one of those byproducts, I would suspect that you would know that.
So I would say, observe from the answer a lot of the use of the words "I don't know" and the use of the word "guess." It strikes me that that where we'd be better off in terms of evaluating the need for environmental regulation, and I start from there because I don't necessarily assume it, if we knew what was going on. And if they have the power under existing law to collect that data, it would seem to me that that would be kind of something that you would want to encourage them to do. Otherwise, they can't very effectively be regulating air emissions, could they? Well, we don't know.
I wouldn't want to go there. I mean, in terms of what their statutory authority to do, in terms of regulation, I mean, that's again totally up to the agency to make that interpretation. That's an agency call.
Okay, so we should talk to the agency about that, I guess.
That would be a good idea, I think.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. I hope I did pronounce that correctly. Now, Mr. Posey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Friedman, in your written testimony, you indicate that the Department of Energy, and I quote, contract management remains a significant management challenge. You also highlighted the fact in your testimony that the Department of Energy is the, quote, most contractor-dependent agency on the civilian side of the federal government. Ironically, you note that numerous Department of Energy Inspector General reports have documented missteps, I think they call them, associated with successfully managing the department's contracting process. Just a couple of examples. A February 2013 report from your office confirmed that LGChem employees at the Michigan facility had little work to do and were spending time volunteering at local nonprofit organizations, playing games, and watching movies at the expense of the federal government and taxpayers. Also, number two, a review of the July 2012 security breach at NNSA's 2002 or Y-12 National Security Complex, a site which processes and stores uranium, identified, quote, troubling displays of ineptitude that were chalked up to a lack of contractor governance and federal oversight, which failed to identify and correct early indicators of multiple system breakdowns. And number three that grabbed me, your October 2012 report on foreign travel highlighted the fact that Department of Energy contractors, for some reason, are not bound by travel restrictions that DOE government employees have to adhere to. And so this suggests, of course, that the Department of Energy does not just have an isolated issue with some of its contracts, but rather suffers from a systemic problem in the agency's procurement system. And what actions you would take, I think we'd all like to hear, or would you recommend that DOE take to ensure effective contractor oversight to address those issues and similar issues which could conceivably be wasting billions of taxpayer dollars every year?
Well, Mr. Posey, we have almost a whole inventory of recommendations to address the contracting, granting, cooperative agreement, financial assistance awards, management in the Department of Energy. It is the weak underbelly, from my point of view, of the department. We do a huge amount of contracting. Virtually everything that we do, actually, with obviously some exceptions, is done by contract, including work with regard to the nuclear weapons, the management of our national laboratory system, and I could go on and on and on. What needs to be done? It seems to me we need to seriously revisit the question of finding the right balance between oversight of the contractors and, at the same time, encouraging the contractors, incentivizing the contractors to do the right thing. And it's a balance. It's an issue which has not been resolved in the many years that I've spent looking at the Department of Energy system. That's, to me, the prime recommendation.
Well, this is my first year on this committee, and so this is kind of shocking to me. And I get the feeling from what else I've read and from hearing you, that this is not a new problem at DOE. And apparently there have been proposed solutions before. Can you give me a little bit of insight as to how they were received or taken?
This is not a new problem. It's been going on for years. The fundamental structure of the way the Department of Energy manages really goes back to the Manhattan Project. It has many of the same elements that existed in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and 1960s. So it's a long-standing issue, and finding, as I say, finding that right balance is extremely difficult. A number of administrations have tried and made valiant efforts. The contractors frequently push back, sometimes their interests and the department's interest. Of course, when it comes to national security, I'm not quarreling with that, but their interest is not always exactly parallel to that of the department. So, as I say, finding the right balance is tricky, but it seems to me that's the avenue we need to pursue.
Well, but besides the obvious waste of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, my next point was the threat to our national security, to have such ineptitude, such incompetence, such belligerence, obviously, that they seem to be refusing to comply with the Inspector General's recommendations to remedy this situation.
Well, in fairness, Mr. Posey, the senior leadership of the department and the senior leadership with regard to the Y-12 matter, which is fresh and raw and very troubling, and you're absolutely correct. The department's leadership, and I'm not here to support them, I'm not here speaking for them, have gone to great lengths to make sure that the issues that we identified at Y-12 have been addressed. At some point in the future, in the not-too-distant future, we will be going back in there to see if, in fact, the remedies are as effective as they've been portrayed. So you have my commitment with regard to that, but you've struck a chord on the issue that is extremely important, and national security is the highest priority, of course, and Y-12, presumably prior to the intrusion in last summer, was thought to be the Fort Knox of the weapons complex.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Chairman's time's expired. And we'll start a second round of questions. Mr. Elkins, one challenge facing the EPA is its transparency. In fact, to me, it seems like that's a huge issue for this whole administration. We were promised by the President that he would have the most transparent administration in history, and it seems like that he's redefined transparency to be obscurity. EPA's use of alias emails appears to corrupt the agency's records by not tying an individual's names to an email account. This committee sought your help in reviewing whether EPA followed relevant federal records laws, regulations, and policies, and for that I thank you. Understanding that EPA could hypothetically follow all relevant requirements and still frustrate records transparency, will your review address whether the current policies are sufficient to maintain the integrity of agency records and allow public transparency?
Yes, Chairman Braun, the focus of our review, and as you know, we're still in the process of doing that review, is going to take a look at whether or not the agency's policies, regulations, and guidance was followed. Based on that review and based on the findings, we will be making recommendations if we find that the agency has not followed its policy, regulations, and reviews, and make recommendations how they can do so. But yes, we will be definitely addressing any issues that arise, and we'll keep you informed.
Well, I appreciate that. The public deserves to know, and use of alias email accounts is obviously a way of trying to get away from Freedom of Information Act and other ways of holding people accountable and responsible, and I think it's absolutely critical that, and I understand that this is not the only administration who's utilized that type of activity, and I think it's deplorable that Administrator Jackson did do so, and I hope that you'll follow very closely and give this committee some input. But before you were confirmed as EPA IG, you worked for the EPA's counsel's office under Administrator Jackson. Were you aware of Administrator Jackson's use of email aliases?
No, you're absolutely right. I did work in the Office of General Counsel, and no, I was not aware. This issue only surfaced, as far as my awareness level, is when it was raised, as a result of the issues that, we've had discussion on here at this hearing.
Well, I think there's a potential appearance of a conflict of interest here, and what are you going to do to protect against a potential conflict of interest related to this review in view of the fact that you were in the counsel's office?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good question, and it is something that when we embarked on doing this review, I raised the issue, quite frankly, as to whether or not there was any conflicts, and I had a detailed discussion with my staff to determine whether or not, I should recuse myself. But at the, after going through that discussion, it was determined that I had absolutely no knowledge about any of the issues that we were going to take a look at. Two, the focus of our review is again going to take a look at whether or not the agencies followed, the law, and if that is the case, it either did or did not. And so, it didn't see, based on that sort of review, it didn't seem that I should recuse myself from that because.
When can we expect the report of that review?
I'm sorry, sir.
When can we expect a report of that review?
I would say probably within the next couple of months, at least.
Well, please get it to us as quickly as you can. My time's just about up. Mr. Friedman, after receiving anonymous complaints alleging improprieties in the department's loan programs office, you initiated a special inquiry and issued a report that identified weaknesses in the administration of loan programs at DOE. These findings parallel similar conclusions to a March 2011 report from your office on DOE's loan guarantee program for clean energy technologies, as well as findings in a GAO report on DOE loan guarantees. Your testimony states that the loan guarantee program is on your watch list, as you termed it. I recently received a letter from DOE's loan programs office that seems to indicate that everything was just fine. Can you explain why you listed the loan guarantee program?
Mr. Chairman, there are aspects of our work in loan guarantee that I can talk about. There are aspects that I cannot talk about in public session, that they're law enforcement sensitive. The cumulative body of work that we've done and that we've seen indicates to us in the obvious number of problems within the program that are in the public domain in and of themselves are sufficient to cause us to raise concerns about the program, its management, the selection process, the documentation that is maintained, and those sorts of issues. So that's our basis. I hope that's a satisfactory answer.
Well, the American hardworking taxpayers need all you guys to be very diligent. The loan programs office has certainly come under a lot of criticisms, and I hope you will continue the process. Now I'll recognize Mr. Peters for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I just had one more question for Mr. Friedman. I think you indicated that the department might establish a process to look at whether they could save money by consolidating their labs. This may even lead to closing some facilities. So I just wanted to see if you could explain for us maybe kind of what you thought the magnitude of the savings we might realize might be without undermining the missions of the department's labs. I also understand it's something like a $3.5 billion ticket. And then in adopting any process, do you have principles that you believe should guide the department's review for a sort of a lab BRAC kind of process?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Excuse me. Just to make sure we're clear, this is our recommendation. as part of the management challenge process, the department has not adopted it.
No, I understand.
In fact, we're realists, Mr. Peters, and we're talking about jobs here and people and states in which these laboratories play a very important economic development role, and they're extremely important. The basic framework of the laboratory system, as it's currently established, and there has been some tinkering at the margins, is a remnant of the 1950, 1960s model. It has not changed. There are 16 FFRDCs spending about $11 billion a year, and of that amount, 35 to 40% is for administrative costs. Our view is that given the current economic times, there ought to be a thoughtful approach, taking politics out of the mix, if that's at all humanly possible, to determine whether all of those labs make sense, whether there aren't ways of consolidating so that more of what is currently devoted to administrative costs could be devoted to direct science would be possible. That our recommendation has not been adopted, and I might say there are a number of members of Congress who have said it was dead on arrival. So we did it because we thought we made the recommendation because we thought it was the right thing to do, and the time has come for a reevaluation, but it is not received with a great deal of acceptance.
Just to follow up.
No white smoke, you might say.
No, just to follow up, did you suggest a process by which that might take place?
Well, we believe that the BRAC, something patterned after the Department of Defense BRAC style, BRAC commission is exactly what we would recommend.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Friedman, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Now, Mr. Posey, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for asking about Yucca Mountain earlier. I was really concerned about that, and you kind of got some of that air cleared for me. Mr. Friedman, I appreciate your comments that it's not the top leadership at DOE, but clearly some of the contractor oversight personnel need to have better accountability or need to be more accountable. What tools do you, the IG, need, do you believe, to help that be more effective?
Well, I hope this doesn't disappoint you, Mr. Posey, but I actually think we have a bag of tools available to us currently that allow us to do what needs to be done. Okay. So I'm comfortable with the status quo.
What would you think Congress needed us to do to make them a little bit more accountable? Well,
I am, having been in this position for a long time and have participated in a number of hearings, the sunlight that hearings and congressional oversight forces is, to me, the single most important thing that Congress can do. So having hearings, having those involved in actual oversight and administration of these contracts appear before you, it seems to me is the way of clearing the air, making it transparent, and holding people achieving maximum accountability.
Okay. That didn't work in financial services, with the Securities and Exchange Commission, after they let Madoff steal $70 billion, nobody lost their job. And the answer that was supposed to make us feel good is that, well, at least half the investigators and half the examiners who dropped a ball don't work here anymore. So maybe they're DOE, I don't know. But Mr. Elkins, one of the challenges facing EPA is that of public trust. I'm sure you know that. The American people deserve to know that the regulations created by the EPA are informed by science and not special interest or activism. Your office received a request to conduct a review of the Clean Air Act advisory committees in August 2011. Can you tell me where that stands now?
I don't have that information right off the top of my head. I can get back to you on that, though. 1 second. Okay, my subject matter expert tells me that you can expect it in late summer.
Okay. Please keep the committee appraised.
I will do so.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. I've got a few more questions that I'd like to ask. And I want to go back to the loan guarantee program, Mr. Freedom. Y'all oversee that program oversees over $38 billion for 40 loan projects. Does your office plan on conducting any reviews on the loan selection process?
Well, we have looked at the documentation. We have already published a report on the documentation that was maintained on the decision-making associated with the loan granting process, Mr. Chairman. I admit to you that I am not as up to speed on the current status of the program as perhaps I should be, but my impression is that the vast majority of the loans have already been effectuated, if not all of the loans have been effectuated. But if there are loans to be granted in the future, we will be looking at that process.
I hope you'll be a very strong watchdog on that. Mr. Elkins, come back to a question that Mr. Posey was asking you. The President has stated that if he cannot get his radical environmental agenda pushed through Congress, that he's going to go around Congress. What is the IG office doing to try to maintain that we follow the Constitution and follow what should be done, where the President's saying he's going to take Congress out of the decision-making process. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. He's going to push his agenda, and he doesn't care whatsoever what Congress does or doesn't do. What is IG's office going to be doing to keep us in Congress and the American public aware of what's going on and make sure that EPA does not promulgate regulations that is not authorized through congressional action?
Mr. Braun, our responsibility and mission, as you know, in the Office of Inspector General, is to provide oversight and to make sure that the agency follows its laws, the regulations, and guidance. We will continue to do that. We'll continue to provide that oversight, and in areas where we determine that the agency is not following the law, we will shed light on it, and we will make it aware through our work products. So you can be assured of that.
Well, we're counting on you. The American people, the hardworking taxpayers of America, are counting on you to do so. And I just trust that you will do so and look forward to your reporting this committee. Ms. Kendall, as I said in my opening statement, I'm concerned with how the DOI and the DOIG handle allegations of scientific integrity and scientific misconduct. And I believe that this is a serious challenge facing the agency as it moves forward, as we move forward. Given the allegations facing not only the department, but also the IG, I'm not sure we can trust the department's decisions. While some scientific integrity and misconduct cases seem to have been handled appropriately by the IG, it appears as though allegations from a scientific integrity officer have gone ignored. How do you decide when to pursue an allegation of scientific integrity or misconduct?
Well, we will look at any allegation of scientific misconduct. We are not, however, in a position to make a determination really on scientific integrity. The Office of Inspector General does not have any kind of scientific expertise in it. So we have to draw a fairly clean line between integrity of science and misconduct. When there are allegations of misconduct, we can investigate those factually. We cannot make a determination about the science, however.
Well, I'm real concerned. As I mentioned already, when you're working in collaboration with the folks that you're supposed to be overseeing, I'm not sure that that's going to occur. Mr. Elkins, in response to my earlier question, you said you would review whether the EPA followed current policies regarding the integrity of maintaining agency records. I want to clarify my question. Will your review also address whether EPA's policies are sufficient?
We will make, if we find that the EPA's policies are not sufficient and that additional internal controls need to be implemented in order to make them sufficient, we will make that recommendation. Yes, we will be looking at that, and yes, we will be looking at that.
Okay, Mr. Elkins, my time's expired. Mr. Posey, I think he's gone, and I appreciate members being here, and I appreciate y'all's testimony. And I appreciate all your forbearance with us and flexibility also. Again, I want to thank you. Members of the committee may have additional questions, and I ask you to respond to those in writing. Please do so very expeditiously. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.